All right, hello again, Ling 201. We got one more lecture on phonetics to go here. Today we're going to talk about suprasegmentals, and I'll explain what that means here in a second. Before I get into it, though, I want to mention that there are quick writes both for this particular lecture and the lecture that we just finished up on the dimensions of articulation. I forgot to mention that one before I recorded the previous lecture, but that's quick write number 13. And that's about the way you say this phrase and the way you say that word in these two contexts. So please complete that one before you watch the previous lecture. I know I'm saying this a little bit too late, but hopefully not too late. And then for this particular lecture, I have another quick write about the phrase "who stole the book" and how you say that one in a variety of different contexts as well. And these two should help us think a little bit about what we're going to talk about today, which are the features of phonetics that don't sort of apply to just one specific segment at a time. Okay, so before I get into that as well, I have another sort of by the way you should know this before we move on slide. And it's about something which is mentioned in the book, another symbol, which you can find here. This is the official IPA chart for vowels, excluding the vowels which are not found in English, at least the ones that I haven't described in the variety of English that we're talking about in class. I will mention that this has slightly different labels here for the height dimension. Instead of saying high and low, it says close and open. So like how closed is your mouth, that's a high vowel, and how open is your mouth, that's a low vowel. And then it has like mid-high and mid-low. Try not to worry about this too much. Otherwise, everything else is basically arrayed in the same way as it is for the vowel chart we've seen in the textbook. Notice that this wedge here is a back vowel in this particular diagram. And then right next to it is this vowel which looks like a backwards C. But its nickname is open O because it kind of looks like an O which is not completely closed here. It's pretty similar to this vowel O up here. I've actually got on this slide tokens of me producing these various vowels because a lot of them are pretty similar to each other, so you can listen to these if you download the notes and just play these different tokens. I've got Bruce Springsteen here again for these two in the middle. And for open O, I've got this token, O, like that, which is not that vowel. I'm not going to play these two, but you can play them at home if you want to. I want to just focus on this guy here briefly because it is mentioned in a few places in the textbook. So for most Canadians, this vowel only appears in one specific context, which is that it comes before an R. And so I can give you the example of a word like for, and this is going to be pronounced the same way whether you pronounce or spell it F-O-R or F-O-U-R. For, and to sort of hear this vowel, which is not quite O, that one's a little bit higher. What you can do is you can say this word, but stop before you get to the R. So prepare to say the whole thing, but in the middle, just stop at the vowel and say for, and that vowel is not quite an O. And this trick only works if the open O is in the same syllable as the R. So like if you say a word like foray, maybe not. It's probably going to wind up being more like an O, like this. So be careful about that. The R comes right after it in the same syllable. You can kind of hear a contrast as well, going back to Southern American English, which is a wealth of linguistic data for us. But in that variety of English, they don't pronounce this vowel the same way. They actually pronounce it with like the O diphthong, like for versus four. So that's what that vowel sounds like. And it's not super hard to figure out how to transcribe it because, again, it's only going to come in this particular context, which is a phonological pattern in language. And we're going to start talking about phonology next time, which is, as I mentioned before, just the patterns we see in the way that sounds line up with each other in speech, in language. Okay, so just so you know, that's what that vowel is all about. Other than that, I want to move on to suprasegmentals. So last time we talked about the features of consonants and vowels, and at the start of that lecture, I made this broad distinction between consonantal articulations, which are sort of more constricted in the vocal tract, and vowel articulations, which are more open in the vocal tract. But together, they make up the class of what are called segments in phonetics. So each segment is basically a configuration of articulations, a configuration of specific features, phonetic features of what you can do with your articulators that are ordered in time in an utterance. And normally when we are transcribing speech or words in a language, we're transcribing the specific segments and the order in which they appear in a word or phrase or what have you. But that's not everything that happens during speech. There are also features, phonetic features, that sort of ride on top of the segments, which we call suprasegmental features. So the supra here just means above the segments. And as I mentioned here, I'll mention it again. These are features which aren't specific necessarily to one individual segment. They go over a string of segments as you speak. And it'll become pretty clear what I'm talking about here in a second, but one basic example is that languages organize strings of segments into syllables, which I'm presuming is a concept you've come across before, but I'll just walk you through the basics of it because knowing what's in a syllable will help us understand how to transcribe the segmental level of speech a little bit better. So syllables are tricky. I think we probably all have an intuition about what a syllable is or is not, but it's a little tricky to know exactly where syllables begin and end. I kind of gave you an inadvertent example there where I was talking about foray versus for. Is that R in the same syllable as the open O in that word foray? Maybe not. It depends on how you stress it. Yeah, so there's certain ambiguous words where it's hard to figure out where the boundary is between syllables, but normally we know exactly how many syllables are in a word. So syllable is a word with 3 syllables in it, right? 1, 2, 3, and they generally correspond to the different vowels in a word, right? R has 1, hard has 1, so on and so forth. Define has 2, so on and so forth. It's kind of like how many beats you have in the particular word. Then around those beats, you organize the different consonants and vowels. So in sort of the ideal case, a syllable is going to have a vowel in the middle, which is known as the syllabic peak. And then optionally, it will have consonants at maybe the beginning or at the end, but it doesn't have to have either of those things, as long as it has some sort of syllabic peak in the middle that sort of provides the timing for that beat of the syllable. When I was a very young kid, they taught us about syllables by having us clap along to the syllables in each word, like syllable and phonetically. So does phonetically have 2 or 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 syllables, or 4 phonetically? Maybe it has 4. But that's the idea, is normally you can organize sort of other gestures alongside the beats and the syllables as you produce them. Yeah. I want to say something about Japanese, but maybe I'll save it here in a second. In English, what's interesting is that you can not only have vowels in the middle of a syllable, but you can have 2 types of consonants. You can have nasals, just M and N, and liquids that form the peak of the syllable. And when that happens, these are called syllabic consonants. And we actually have a nice little example in the word syllable itself. So syllable, the first 2 syllables are organized around these vowels I and That's a schwa here in the middle. And then in the last syllable of syllable, we have a syllabic L. So there's not really a vowel here at the tail end. And in order to represent that in our transcriptions, we have to use a slightly different notation for that consonant. So syllabic consonants are going to be transcribed with a small vertical dash underneath them. I'll give you some other examples here, like the word chasm. There's only a few examples of these that are really pretty clear for the nasals. It works a little bit better with the liquids. But chasm, if you go straight from the Z sound in chasm to the M without putting a little schwa in there, chasm, then you put a little strike mark under the M to say, well, this guy is its own syllable. We'll get to this as well in a second, but this little strike mark here in the first syllable denotes that this is the stressed syllable in chasm. Button, I'm transcribing this with a glottal stop here in the middle, button, because I'm not really making a T with the tip of my tongue there. I'm just saying button. And if I go straight from that glottal stop to the N afterwards, that N is syllabic, and I'm just putting a little syllabic diacritic underneath it, as we call it. Eagle is sort of like the word syllable. It has a syllabic L at the tail end, so eagle, just L by itself basically in that last syllable. And then the in a word like lecture, has a syllabic R at the tail end. There are different ways that phoneticians transcribe this sound at the tail end, but I want you to transcribe it as a syllabic R. It just makes it straightforward. It lines up with these other examples, and it turns out there are a lot of different words like this. In fact, the word word has a syllabic R in it. Maybe I can transcribe that for you real quick if I remember how to do it using this notation system. But word, yeah, word can be transcribed like that. Or bird is another one. Like, like that. Bird, word, so on and so forth. That in the middle is just a syllabic R by itself, just to show you can get these syllabic consonants without having to have stress on some other syllable in the word. And I will point out that the textbook does something which is kind of traditional in phonetics, and it transcribes these syllabic consonants like and ul with a little bit of a schwa in front of them in a lot of cases. But the way these are pronounced in Canadian and American English, that those schwas are not really there, normally speaking. I will, however, give you one example of an American, or a speaker of a particular variety of American English who does have a schwa in this particular context, so you can kind of hear what it sounds like when it's a little bit different. Get rid of that. Actually, I'll give you a couple examples here. So this is a commercial from... It's a Super Bowl commercial from about 10 years ago or so. Still kind of funny. But I know some of my examples are dated, but they're for a good cause. And this one features some old actors in a Snickers commercial.
Mike, what's your deal, man?
Come on, man. You've been riding me all day.
Mike, you're playing like Betty White out there.
That's not what your girlfriend said.
Baby. Eat a Snickers. Better?
Better. Mike, I'm all bet. That hurt.
You're not you when you're hungry. Snickers satisfies.
All right. So thank you, Snickers Corporation. I'm not doing this. I'm not being paid to do this. But this actor at the tail end is not Betty White. His name is Abe Vigoda. He's a bit of an obscure character actor from like the 70s. At any rate, he says that hurt at the tail end there, but he puts a little bit of a schwa right before that R, in between the H and the R.
That hurt.
That hurt. So that sounds a little bit different from the way I would say it, and maybe the way you say it too. But for me, it's, if I can get the right font set here, for me it's this, that hurt. For Abe, it is this sequence, that heart. So there's a little more of a vowel gap in there. And there's a lot of examples of this, just to kind of be clear here. So the word Snickers itself, you could transcribe like this, or you should transcribe like this because it's the right way to do it. And I keep doing that. You don't have to worry about the font set when you guys do it necessarily, but Snickers would be like that. And what was the other example I was thinking of? Yeah, I can't remember off the top of my head. But all these have, better. Do you feel better? Maybe I do. Oops. Can't remember how to get that. flap in there, but I'll give you another example. Better. Yeah, maybe I'll put it up here so you can see it a little bit better. All of these have syllabic R in them. Better. So we got stress on this first syllable, and then the last syllable is syllabic R. In the middle, we have this little creature, which is a flap. In theory, you could pronounce this with an actual T in there. Maybe if you are a speaker of British English, you might say beta, beta. Oops, not beta. Beta, like that. Yeah. So this is the British way of saying this word, beta, and this is the North American way, better. There's differences not only in the middle consonant here, but they don't have a syllabic R in English. They just have that schwa. Or they don't have that syllabic R in British English. They just have the schwa. Okay, I'm getting a little bit distracted, but this is fun for me. Hopefully it's at least a little bit fun for you too. But in case you're confused, the main point is that this is how you transcribe that sound. It's syllabic R in English. Hurt, bird, word, lecture, that sort of thing. All right. The main point of this lecture is supposed to be about suprasegmentals. So I want to just give you kind of some basic examples of how these features work in language, and then also line it up with specifics about how we transcribe stress. I've shown you a few examples of that as well already. But other suprasegmental features in language above and beyond just syllables include stress, length, tone, and intonation. Unfortunately, we don't have enough time in this class to go into these in depth, but like I said, you can always take my phonetics classes if you keep moving forward with this. But I want to present these to you with sort of the framework of the fact that these features are always defined in a relative manner. So when we talk about what's happening with a segment, like what kind of features does a segment have, like that's kind of an objective or absolute thing. Like, do I actually make contact with my two lips? Buh, when I make a voiced bilabial stop. Buh, if I don't, it's not a stop. It might be a fricative or something like that. That's not how suprasegmentals work. Suprasegmentals work in terms of like contrasting different, parts of the sequence. So like within an utterance, some segments are going to be longer than others, but there's not like a specific length of time you have to hit for a segment to be long. Some syllables might be more stressed than others, but there's not some sort of specific features they have that make them stressed as opposed to not stressed. So these are defined relatively, which is maybe why a lot of people shy away from them, because that gets a little bit messy. But I'll show you what I mean by that. So stress makes a syllable sound more prominent. You're basically putting more articulatory effort into it, and that yields sort of more, a lot of different things actually. It yields a lot more intensity, a lot higher pitch, and usually a longer duration as well. The way we're going to transcribe that is by putting a little accent mark over the vowel in the middle of a stressed syllable. And if you have a syllabic consonant in the middle of that, as the peak in the middle of that syllable, then you put the accent mark over the syllabic consonant as well. But let's take the easiest examples first. Here's the word, this word said two different ways. Let me make that louder. Oh, right, I forgot about something else.
Contrast. Contrast.
Yeah, I've got another video I want to play for you guys, just for kicks. Here's the word, that word.
Proceeds. Proceeds.
A little bit louder than my contrast examples.
Contrast. Contrast. Contrast.
So the reason why we have to transcribe stress here is because stress is what's making the distinction between these two variations on this word or this sequence of segments. So in the noun form, we get stress on the first syllable, which is denoted with this little strike mark.
Contrast.
And in the verb form, it's on the second syllable.
Contrast.
And I think I mentioned this before, but stress shifts from the first to the second syllable, changing the lexical category of the word. But you also get a few little minor segmental changes here too. We get a aspirated stop at the beginning of the stress syllable in both cases. This vowel changes quality as well. It goes from an ah to a schwa here.
Contrast. Contrast.
Otherwise they're the same. But basically stress is going to make a syllable, everything in a syllable sound a little more clear, a a little more distinct, which is why like ah is a more distinct vowel than schwa, which is just kind of in the middle of the space, close to all other sorts of vowels. For proceeds,
Proceeds. Proceeds.
again, the stress shifts from first to second syllable there. And again, when you de-stress the first syllable, the vowel just turns into schwa again. And we have an aspirated stop here at the beginning of this one.
Proceeds. Proceeds.
But the main point is this is how you transcribe stress. You have to pick out one syllable. You have to identify which syllable is the most prominent in the word, and that's where the stress goes. I will say a lot of students learn about primary versus secondary stress in high school or wherever, because even among stress syllables, some sound more prominent than others. I'm not going to get worried about that in this class. There's a way to transcribe that in the IPA that we cover in 341, but don't worry about it for this class. Just if a syllable is stressed, put the stress mark on top of it. Yeah, and it's often difficult for students, a lot of beginning students, to kind of identify a stress syllable as well. It should be the one that jumps out the most at you, and one way to kind of help you conceive of it is to mess around with where the stress goes in a word. So take the word syllable, for instance. Hopefully you can perceive without further guidance that the first syllable is stressed in syllable. But if you can't, you can kind of try to focus on stressing other syllables in the word, like maybe if the second syllable in syllable is stressed, then it's syllable or syllable. But I don't think you say it that way. Syllable would be stress on the last syllable. To give you another example of how this shifts between varieties of English, so where I come from, the language spoken by people or widely spoken in the Middle East is called Arabic. So that has stress on the first syllable. I've heard a lot of Canadians say Arabic, which shifts the stress to the second syllable. Arabic versus Arabic. Which one of those syllables sounds louder to you in those two contexts? That's stress, basically. Okay. I haven't played this clip in a long time. I might as well do it. This is probably going to get me in trouble with YouTube again, so you might not even see this. But this is from another older clip from the TV show 30 Rock, which I find amusing, and also talks about basically both stress and syllabic consonants.
Oh, this isn't for TGS. It's for my movie. The Rur has a limited release next week.
Oh, congratulations. I didn't know they had a release date for for that movie.
Oh, sorry. Gotta take this. Hello?
You still don't know what the title is?
No, no one does. It's gone on way too long to ask her about it.
This title isn't hard to understand, right?
No, it's awesome. I love that we can work while we're on cocaine.
All right, so the word there is rural jur, which is the sort of thing that would probably give my wife nightmares if she had to try to pronounce it. She gets upset enough about squirrel. But anyways, how do you transcribe that? Looks like I'm good here. So the sequence is this. And maybe I guess I can't make this bigger that way. I'll do it like this. So rural jur, got the first word is 2 syllables, rural. And maybe there's a schwa in here, but let's say there's not rural, if you say it like that, like a good Midwesterner would. And those are both syllabic. So it's like that, rural jur, and these are both syllabic as well. Like that, and then there's stress on the first syllable in both of them, rural jur. And it's kind of hard to hear, like where one syllable begins and the other ends in this last word, jur. There's not really a schwa there. You just kind of make a little bit of a pause when going from stress to unstressed syllable. But that's what's going on there. And again, the sound is itself not that much fun for someone who's not a native speaker of American or Canadian English to acquire to begin with, and putting 2 in a row like that is just kind of unfair. I will say as well, can often cause problems. There's a lot that goes on in the production of an sound in English. As I mentioned, you kind of round your lips on top of it often. You also stick the root of your tongue into your throat as you say it. So a lot of kids can take a while to acquire that. It may be often one of the last sounds they really get a handle on when they're learning English. But anyways, that's all beside the way. That's just kind of for fun. But also to remind you that even a syllabic consonant can have stress on it. Okay, length or duration. So languages can distinguish segments on the basis of length, which is where some segments are simply going to be longer than others. We don't do this contrastively in English, so the examples I'm going to give you are from other languages. And the first one is from Italian, which contrasts both long and short vowels and long and short consonants. So I've got some examples of an Italian speaker doing this sort of thing. Italian has some sounds which we don't have in English as well. So it's got a palatal lateral, which is represented with this symbol. You don't need to memorize this for this class, but just so you know. It's also got a palatal nasal, which is represented with this symbol. And then the way that you represent length or a longer segment in any language, whether it's Italian or something else, is you put a little colon after it, or technically in the IPA, it's sort of these two little triangles pointing at each other. So let me give you an example here with these two words.
Velare, vegliare.
And maybe you can hear that. It's pretty subtle, but this L is going to be shorter than this palatal liquid.
Velare, vegliare.
And we also have a contrast in the length of the vowels. So we can try the word names.
Nomi.
Versus the word grandfather.
Nonno.
So here the O is short and then the N is longer.
Nonno.
And here the O is longer and the M is shorter.
Nomi.
And we can also listen to this sort of contrast with the palatal nasals too.
Gnomi. Sogno.
Yeah, and hopefully you can pick up on that. I've also got some examples from Danish, which are a little better in terms of lining up as minimal pairs. So here the length contrast is represented with the long segments just having this colon after them. So let's try these in these examples in the second two columns. So we have the word wild.
Ville.
Versus rest.
Ville.
And hopefully you can hear this E is longer.
Ville. Ville.
And you'll hear similar contrasts as we go.
Minde. Mene. Læse. Læse. Masse. Masse.
Yeah, so Danish is interesting. It has a similar, as these vowels, all these vowels are found in English as well, but in English we don't have this short versus long contrast. And in fact, our contrast between this vowel, this is normally a diphthong in English, and this is not a diphthong, but this is also a tense vowel in English, and this is a lax vowel. So this tense vowel tends to be longer, and this lax vowel tends to be shorter. So when we hear a lax vowel that's long, it starts sounding like a tense vowel to us.
Læse.
So maybe that sounds like læse to you.
Masse. Masse.
I don't know exactly what that one sounds like to you, but it's not how we normally pronounce an a in English.
Masse.
That's a little bit closer to it. Okay, so those are duration or length contrasts. Languages can also contrast on the basis of what is called tone. So we've talked about voicing. So you have your vocal folds here and your larynx, and when you have voicing, they're opening and closing at a rapid rate. And you can actually you can change the rate at which they open and close. And when they are opening and closing faster, it sounds like you have a higher voice. And when they're opening and closing slower, then you have a lower voice like that. That's all that's based on, basically. The trick is, or the interesting part of this is that speakers of a language can change the rate at which the vocal folds vibrate to signal meaningful differences between words or particular parts of an utterance. So we hear the rate of vocal fold vibration as the pitch of a speaker's voice. I guess I can mention here that in general, because of physiological reasons, the vocal folds of female speakers will vibrate at a higher rate than the vocal folds of male speakers. So we tend to hear women as having a higher voice than men for this. This is one of the reasons why. But within any given speaker, you can change that range. So I can speak in a high voice. I can speak in a low voice. You can do that too. And in fact, you do this whenever you're speaking. You don't just speak in a flat monotone pitch all the way through. You go up and down throughout an utterance every single time you speak. In tone languages, though, it works a little bit different. So each syllable has to be produced with a characteristic tone. So there's two ways to do this. One is called a registered tone language, where the pitch must hit a certain level on any given syllable. And then there's also contour tone languages, which are a little more complex. The pitch changes on a single syllable may form a complex pattern in terms of how it goes up and down or stays at the same level. So I'll give you the somewhat simpler example first to kind of give you a sense of what this sounds like. This uses a transcription notation, which is in the IPA, where it's going to use what looks like this stress mark for a high tone, and it's going to use sort of the downsloping stress mark for a low tone. This language, Ibibio, which is spoken in southern Nigeria, also has falling tones. So that's basically a high tone followed by a low tone, and that's transcribed with this little caret mark over a vowel. So let's listen to a few of these examples. It also has an open O here for you to listen to. But this is a high tone syllable followed by a high tone syllable. So it just kind of stays at a high level there. You can contrast that with a high tone followed by a low tone. You can also have a low tone in the first syllable. And then two low tones. And then we can listen to what the falling tones sound like. Right, so this one starts out high. This one starts out low. So it kind of has to pop up to get to the right spot for the falling tone to begin in that particular case. Okay, that's how tones work in Ibibio. I'll mention that most languages in the world are tone languages. English is an exception to that. It's not a tone language. Most registered tone languages, or a great number of them, are found in Africa. Contour tone languages are more characteristic of Asian languages. So a classic example of a contour tone language is Mandarin or Chinese. And actually, I'll mention here, in case you don't know, that Chinese is an interestingly unique language in that Chinese as a language is written one way. It doesn't use a segmental writing system. It has a writing system where it just has characters to represent individual words, but there's not individual sounds in its characters. So you have to learn a character for each word in the language, which is a lot of learning, basically. But one of the benefits of that is that you can use those word symbols for no matter how the word actually winds up being pronounced. So Chinese itself kind of is an umbrella language, or at least the writing system. The written language is an umbrella language for 8 different languages, or many different languages within the country, which are pronounced in a different way. So for instance, Cantonese is the language which is widely spoken in Hong Kong, and it's written the same way as Mandarin, which is spoken in Beijing. But Cantonese does not sound like Mandarin, and in fact, the two languages are not really mutually comprehensible in spoken form, but they're totally comprehensible in written form, which is pretty cool. But focusing here again on Mandarin, Mandarin is a contour tone language, and I've got some pitch tracks here which show you how fast this speaker's vocal folds are opening and closing at any one point in time. So this is about 250 times per second at the high end, 150 times per second at the low end. And this speaker is going to say this syllable ma in 4 different ways in Mandarin, and each way means something different in the language. So when it starts high and stays high, it means mother. When it starts mid and kind of dips down and goes up, it means hemp. When it starts mid and goes down, it's horse. And when it starts high and goes down, it's scold. So here we go. Number 1.
Ma.
Number 2.
Ma. Ma. Ma.
Okay, those all mean something different. You have to pay attention to the pitch of the speaker's voice to make sense of this.
Ma. 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 Ma.
And that's how Mandarin works. And that's how basically any contour tone language works, although each language kind of has its different inventory of pitch patterns that it associates with different syllables. And what's fun about this is that you can make entire sentences out of just this one individual syllable pronounced with different tones.
Mama, mama.
That's mother scolds the horse.
Mama, mama.
That's the horse scolds mother. So you got to pay attention to this to figure out who's scolding who, because these tone contours matter.
Mama, mama. Mama, mama.
And if you're not used to that, if you're a native speaker of a language like English, it can take a while to get used to. But it works over time. Every language kind of presents its own challenges to those who learn it as a second language, no matter where they come from. But that's what makes language fun. Okay, English is not a tone language like Chinese or Ibibio, but it does have something called intonation, just so you know. So in English intonation, I'll talk about two levels. It's a pretty complex system. We talk about it when we get to advanced phonetics, if you want to take that class eventually. But in English intonation, there are accents, either high or low, which attach to stressed syllables. I'm going to transcribe them with a high star, high asterisk, or L star, L asterisk. And then there are also tones, or what we call boundary tones, at the ends of phrases and utterances. And those are transcribed with an H percent sign or a low percent sign. And I'm not going to get too bogged down in the details of this. I'll just give you some examples of what this sounds like. But the important difference in how English works as opposed to how like Mandarin or Ibibio works is that the English tones or accents are specified by conversational context rather than by what's in the lexicon. So going back to Mandarin, like every time you say mother, it's got to sound like this.
Ma.
You've got to have a high level pitch for that. Or horse
Ma.
has to sound like that. What the syllables sound like in English depend on what has been said in a conversation and what sort of speech act you're trying to elicit by saying something. So in English intonation, if you're saying something as a statement, there's usually going to be a high accented syllable somewhere within the sentence and then a low tone at the end of the sentence. And this can vary a little bit by context and speaker, but let's say I have this particular phrase or sentence and I want to say it declaratively, then I will say,
Manny came with Anna.
Yeah, like maybe somebody asked like, well, who came with Anna to the dance?
Manny came with Anna.
Right, that works. And you maybe can hear there's a higher pitch here in my voice for the stressed syllable in Manny, and then my voice trails off down to the low end of my pitch range at the end of the utterance.
Manny came with Anna.
You can contrast that with like a yes-no question, which is a question that has an answer of either yes or no. And normally the way those work is that you have a low accented syllable somewhere within the sentence, and then you have a high tone, a high boundary tone at the end of the sentence. And so we can kind of just have everything switch places here and say this.
Manny came with Anna?
Yeah, so you can kind of imagine this as like a conversational context, like, speaker one says, well, who came to the dance with Anna?
Manny came with Anna.
And then the person responds,
Manny came with Anna?
Like, really? That happened? So the high percent or high boundary tone at the end kind of signals this is a question. And then the low star on the stressed syllable of Manny signals that, well, the thing we're questioning is Manny.
Manny came with Anna?
Like that, right?
Manny came with Anna. Manny came with Anna?
So you can say this in multiple different ways depending on the context. It's not like there's one tone lined up with each syllable in the word, in every word. And that's basically how English intonation works. It gets a little more complicated than that, but that's the basic idea. And that is the basic idea of suprasegmentals. I'm not going to say anything more about it right now. The main things you have to worry about in your transcriptions are stressed syllables and syllabic segments, wherever you might find them. One thing I will say about stressed syllables is that if you just have a word that has only one syllable in it, like word, then don't worry about, actually I'll skip that. Don't worry about transcribing stress in it, because remember what I said earlier, that stressed is defined relatively, such that some syllables are more stressed than others. So if you just have one word or one syllable in a word, that syllable is just going to do its own thing. But if you have more than one syllable, then you have to determine which one of these is stressed and which one of these is not stressed. So Snickers has stress on the first syllable. You have to denote that with this little strike mark on top of the I there. So anytime you have more than one syllable, make sure you're transcribing stress. If you don't, you're going to lose points in your transcription exercises. So watch out for that. Also watch out for these little syllabic consonants, and you should be okay. And that's all I'm going to say about phonetics. Next time we'll pick up again and start a new unit on phonology. So I'm looking forward to that, and I will look forward to seeing you there too.